Today, we're going to fire up the time machine and take a trip back to the dot-com boom. That absolutely chaotic, cash-fueled, super high-stakes world. We're going to dig into how these startups hired at a pace that just seemed impossible. And we'll do it all through the lens of this fascinating academic paper from 2001 that captured everything as it was happening. Okay, just picture this for a second. The year is 2000. You've just landed millions in venture capital. Your competitors are launching what feels like every single week, and the market is absolutely screaming winner take all. Your biggest problem isn't your product. It's people. You need to hire an army, and you needed them months ago. So what do? Well, our guide for this is actually a French academic paper from back then. It's like a time capsule. It captured all of these radical hiring methods by studying job ads and surveying the startups themselves. It's this incredible snapshot of a moment that basically wrote the DNA for modern tech recruiting. So just how fast are we talking about here? The phrase blitzscaling wasn't really a thing yet, but trust me, that's exactly what was going on. This wasn't just growth. No, this was a frantic, full-throttle sprint for survival. The scale of it is just staggering. The companies in the study made 934 hires in the year 2000. Now, to put that into perspective, that's almost a 70% jump in their total workforce in just a year. Think about that. They weren't just adding a few people here and there, they were building entire departments from nothing, basically overnight. And this quote right here, it really gets to the core mindset of that whole era. These companies, they weren't just playing by the rules. They couldn't. They were facing this insane pressure, so they basically threw the old HR textbook out the window and just started experimenting, making up the future of work as they went along because, well, what other choice did they have? So how in the world did they do it? The playbook really starts with who they were looking for and where they found them in such a crazy competitive market. And the answers, they show this massive fundamental shift in how you think about finding talent. Yeah, the numbers don't lie. Look at this. Over 71% of the job postings from these startups were for IT roles. Compare that to less than 45% for your typical company. They were in a desperate hunt for developers, for database admins, for anyone who could build the new digital world. Using languages like PHP, Perl, and Java that were powering the first wave of real websites. And they didn't want people with 20 years of experience from some big, slow corporation. The paper makes it super clear that these startups wanted young talent, people who often had very little formal experience. What they really valued was adaptability, potential, and a willingness to just thrive in total chaos. The average age in these companies was only 30 years old. That created a really distinct high-energy culture. All right, so where did they find these people? This table pretty much tells the whole story. I mean, look at the top. Nearly 96% of them were using spontaneous emails, which is basically the great-grandparent of today's LinkedIn InMail. Digital methods, networks, job sites, their own websites were king. And way down at the bottom, the old guard, newspaper ads and public agencies. They were just left in the dust. It was a total revolution in recruiting. Fast, cheap, and all digital. But finding candidates was only half the battle. In a market this hot, you had to close the deal before your competitor even had a chance to make an offer. And that led to this really aggressive, stripped down, and honestly, sometimes reckless way of sealing the deal. First off, they just paid more. Simple as that. The study found that startups not only offered higher average salaries, but they also used these wider salary bands. What that means is they had the flexibility to go way up for a star candidate, outbidding their bigger, more rigid corporate rivals. But cash was one thing. The real secret weapon? Equity. Over half of startup job ads were dangling incentives like stock options, compared to just 19% from regular companies. This wasn't just a job offer, you see. It was a lottery ticket. It was a chance to get rich, to own a tiny piece of the revolution. And that promise was something traditional companies just couldn't compete with. So once a candidate was hooked, the process was an absolute blur. We're talking an average of just over 2 interviews. Forget about those month-long hiring committees. A lot of them used practical tests, sort of the early version of today's coding challenges, to quickly see if you had the skills. The whole goal was to get a candidate from that first phone call to a final decision in less than 2 weeks. Speed was everything. But, and this is a big but, that speed came at a price. To move that fast, you have to cut corners. And get this, over a third of the startups used nothing but interviews to decide. No reference checks, no personality tests, no graphology, which is handwriting analysis, and was actually a thing in France back then. It was just a massive, high-risk bet on your gut feeling. So you're probably wondering, why? Why take these huge risks? Why this relentless, almost obsessive focus on speed and cutting costs? Well, to really get the playbook, you have to understand the brutal, day-to-day pressures these companies were under. The study really boils it down to these three massive threats. First, time. In a market like that, being first was the only thing that mattered. Second, money. That clock was always ticking on their investor funding. And finally, the competition for talent wasn't just tough, it was a street fight. If you waited one extra day, your top candidate was gone. I mean, this quote right here from a CEO they interviewed for the paper, it just says it all. The idea of a 5-year plan was a complete joke. Their entire view of the future was compressed. This crazy sense of urgency wasn't a choice. It was just the reality of their world, and it shaped every single move they made. And this was the metric that kept founders up at night, the cash-burning rate. It controlled everything. It's why they chose free emails over expensive newspaper ads. It's why they did recruiting themselves instead of paying huge fees to agencies. Saving money on recruiting wasn't just about good budgeting. It was about buying your company another week, maybe another month, of life. So here we are, more than 2 decades later. How much of this wild, high-speed playbook is still around? In this last part, let's take a look at the lasting impact of these methods, both the good and, well, the not so good. You can really see the two sides of the coin here, can't you? On one hand, the dot-com era gave us things that are totally standard now. Company career pages, online job ads, the idea that you should get back to candidates quickly. But we also inherited the dangerous stuff, this tendency to lean way too hard on unstructured interviews, to go with your gut, and this cultural habit of seeing HR as a cost center, not a strategic partner. And, you know, the author of this paper saw this coming from a mile away. He basically warned that for these companies where their only real asset was their people, ignoring the part of the business designed to manage that asset, well, that was a huge, dangerous blind spot. It was a warning that, honestly, a lot of companies are still struggling with today. And really, that brings us to the big question for right now. The tech world has changed a lot, but those pressures, speed, funding, competition, they feel pretty familiar, don't they? As we race to build the next big thing, have we actually learned the lessons from the dot-com playbook? Or are we still making that same high-stakes trade-off, choosing to move fast over building something that's meant to last?